Welcome to the Aviation Insurance Podcast, the podcast that helps aircraft owners and aviation businesses learn and understand the complex world of aviation insurance and risk management. From the basic principles of aviation insurance to risk management techniques and updates on the aviation insurance market, the Aviation Insurance Podcast is your guide to traverse the world of aviation insurance. Now, here's your host, Tim Bonnell.
Well, welcome to the Aviation Insurance Podcast. And today I'm excited to have a very special guest to interview. And many of you who watch this podcast probably know him, and he probably needs no introduction. But for formality purposes, I'm very pleased to welcome Bruce Landsberg, who is the vice chair of the NTSB. And his bio is long, but I think it's good to go over it just to get the context of where he comes from and his perspective. So Bruce, he was sworn in as a vice chairman of the NTSB, the National Transportation Safety Board, on August 17th of 18, and is his 43rd member. Before coming to the NTSB, Bruce served as the executive director of the Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association, the Air Safety Foundation, and then as president of that organization from 1992 until he retired in 2014. During his tenure at AOPA, he conducted countless safety seminars, speeches, podcasts, and wrote a monthly column on aviation safety for its magazine, AOPA Pilot, which I'm sure most of our readers had seen. Early in his aviation career, Vice Chairman Landsberg worked for the marketing division of Cessna Aircraft Company in Wichita, Kansas. And that's something Bruce and I have in common, having both spent many years in Wichita. He moved on to Flight Safety International as their first product marketing manager to promote the benefits of simulator training. He also helped to develop an airline pilot transition program for first officer candidates through close collaboration with numerous regional airlines. After graduating from college, Vice Chairman Landsberg was commissioned in the U.S. Air Force as a missile launch officer for the Minuteman III ICBM in North Dakota, where his training in nuclear weapons provided a strong grounding in safety principles and procedures. After leaving the military, he flight instructed for 3 years while putting himself through graduate school, earning a master's degree in industrial technology from the University of Maryland. He has served on many government committees promoting aviation safety, including the assignments as industry co-chair for runway safety, General Aviation Joint Steering Committee, and NASA's Aviation Safety Reporting System. So Bruce, in addition to all these things, is an aircraft owner. He owns a Beach Bonanza that he flies for business and pleasure. He's logged more than 7,000 total logged flying hours and holds the ATP Airline Transport Pilot Certificate with instructor ratings for airplane single and multi-engine land instrument and advanced instrument ground instructor certificates. He is a recipient of the prestigious FAA Wright Brothers Master Pilot Awards. For those of you who know what that is, it means you've flown without an accident for 50 years.
You stopped.
I just got to say, when we're talking about safety and the fit for talking about safety today, you have got the credentials for it. So Bruce and his wife make their home in Mount Pleasant, South Carolina. And when they're in the D.C. area on official business, they stay with family. So Bruce, just welcome to the show. Thanks for being here. I know it's a long bio, but it's well-deserved and well-earned, and we're just really honored to have you here today.
You're very kind. Thank you.
Yeah, well, I read that because today we want to talk, about, obviously insurance, but aviation industry in general and safety. And those are things that you are obviously very well schooled in on all fronts as been a safety officer, a pilot, an aircraft owner. You bring a very unique perspective and this eye on accidents and technology, gives you a very unique perspective compared to just about everybody in the industry. So with that, the big question that I would start with is, what are the biggest issues or changes you've seen recently in the aviation industry that are affecting the safety of aircraft travel and or aviation operations?
Well, I think one of the most obvious ones, and this is nothing new, has been the cost and complexity of maintaining and purchasing aircraft. And this works, I think, against the industry, and I think it works against owners. And this is something that the industry has really not yet come to grips with, and we could have a long discussion about inflation of aircraft and aircraft parts vis-a-vis everything else. But looking at the more positive side of things, I would say there are about three things that have really made a big improvement. One is weather in the cockpit. And I can't say enough about that. Having flown for decades without having an iPad and being able to look at an electronic flight bag to see weather radar and being able to literally have at your fingertips what the TAFs and METARs are is just tremendous. There's really no excuse for having a bad weather encounter, provided you can keep your own enthusiasm in place. Simulation, near and dear to my heart, has improved tremendously, particularly at the bottom end, because of the tremendous improvement in computers in general. And I think we should be doing a lot more simulation, particularly in primary flight training. The companies and pilots at the top end have been using it for decades, and they realize the benefit. The one area that hasn't got enough attention and really needs to get a lot more is in flight data monitoring. And that's something where we have the aircraft instrumented and we know precisely what the aircraft is doing both before and after the crash. Now, some would say that's very self-serving for the NTSB because it makes our job very, very easy to figure out the what happened and why it happened. And in most cases, we already know how it can be prevented once we have the what and the why. But in light airplanes, this is something new, and I think it has the potential for drastically changing our safety record because it certainly did with the airlines.
Yeah, and that's an interesting subject. I just did an interview recently with Danny Mako, who came from, several industries, the auto industry, and then is making his way into the aviation with his expertise on telematics and this flight recording. You see commercials all the time. State Farm, other insurance companies talk about a safe driving discount by driving with the app that's monitoring how they're driving. Obviously. You've got two sides of the coin. You got the safety perspective, and then you got the insurance potential cost savings opportunity. And I know that there's at least one owners group out there of owner-flown single pilot jets that are trying to test this technology in their aircraft. And it's something that appears that is on the horizon to become a bigger influence in our industry. What are you seeing from a potential time frame of this, the flight data recording on the light aircraft side of things and the use of telematics in safety?
Well, I think there are several factors that will influence this and how quickly it gets adopted. The bottom line in everything, safety included, is economics. It drives pretty much everything that we do. So the more incentive that owners and manufacturers have to incorporate this equipment and retrofit it to the older aircraft, the sooner we'll start seeing the benefits. And I was visiting one of the engine manufacturers here recently and asked them why they did not include flight data monitoring as an incentive on their engines. And they kind of looked at themselves and said, well, gee, we don't really know. And if you look back on the history, it was around 1980 when the legal industry decided that aircraft manufacturers were a good target. And you would know better than I, Tim, about what the reserves are, but I'm guessing it's somewhere between 25 and 30% of the cost of any particular part is going to be used for insurance reserves, either self-insuring or with an underwriter. That's a big hit. And if you can show that the part was performing or the aircraft was performing exactly as it was designed to do, and that the problem lies with the pilot, which in about 90% of the cases it does, then you pretty much let the air out of the liability balloon. And in a few cases where there is a hardware problem, well, the proper thing to do is to go ahead and get it fixed for everyone's benefit. So I think the sooner that we can get the insurance community and the manufacturers and the owner community to say, hey, this is a good thing, and it will all save us a huge amount of money. And let's get even beyond the money. Let's talk about the crashes that'll be prevented, because we're now starting to employ the same mindset that has served the airlines so well. So I can't say enough positive about that, and I would hope that everyone listening today will give it some serious consideration. It's on NTSB's recommendation list.
Wow, yeah, that's big, and I just think about a couple things about the ADSB transition, the monetary. It ultimately came down to a regulatory deadline, but what's exciting. The other thing I think about is just these aircraft operators that are using this today on the forefront. They're doing it because they want to be better pilots. They want a safe record. I know when I first started hearing about the safe driving thing, I'm like, man, I don't know that I really want them tracking my driving. I mean, Mr. Chairman, or Vice Chairman, I drive very safely, as far as but it's just there's some intimidation, I think, as a driver and and as a pilot as well, thinking, man, I don't want people seeing all my errors. But I think it's to what you alluded and to what these guys are doing. We want to operate safer. We want to save lives. We want to lower our insurance premiums, all the things that come with that. So I think that really is an exciting thing.
Well, nobody likes to be monitored. I mean, that's a fact. And we know from long studies in psychology that people behave differently when they're being watched. You put a cop on the side of the road with a radar gun, or you set up speed cameras, which we are also a big proponent of, and you get people starting to follow the rules and to behave it. You don't see very many people exceeding the 250 knot speed limit below 10,000 feet. Why? Because ATC is watching. So it makes things work a lot better if people follow the rules. So, I realize it goes against sort of our libertarian background in this country, but from a safety and financial perspective, there really isn't any better way. And I'm going to go ahead and identify that it's VisionJet and Eclipse have pretty much said that their airplanes will be monitored all the time. And the Citation Jet Pilots Association are the ones that have really implemented the really improved training protocols, and it's paying off in all three cases.
Yeah, and that's I was alluding to that, so I appreciate you bring it, because they have the attitude of safety, and they're putting their technology behind their words, and so.
And we should be doing that across the board in light aircraft.
Right. Yeah, I mean, obviously, this podcast, we come from an insurance perspective, but safety always makes the insurance market better for all involved. And so, and as you were alluding to, we've got the regulatory body of the FAA, and then the insurance companies, because most aircraft and aviation operations need insurance, and so a lot of times insurance companies drive the safety initiatives. And so, you may have already alluded to it already, but what do you think is the biggest safety concern or issue in the aviation industry today?
Well, gosh, we could spend an entire podcast on that, but in a nutshell, we have a changing of the guard here as the older pilots, myself included, generation starts to age out, and we bring new people into the industry. Lack of experienced and enough qualified aviation technicians, mechanics, is a huge problem. And particularly with an aging fleet, you've got to have people who really understand the equipment and know from a practical standpoint, not a regulatory one, but from a practical standpoint, hey, this particular item needs to be replaced. Flight instructors, same challenge. And we've had a time, it's always been a problem with flight instructors because it's one of the toughest jobs in the world, and I speak from experience, and yet it's one of the lowest paid, and it's looked at as an apprenticeship position. And I think we have the whole system set up backwards in that regard. And I did a column on that years ago, and I won't bore you with all the details, but let's just say that flight instruction needs to be rethought in terms of how it's done. Pilots not training regularly, well, we sort of tiptoed around that discussion, but there really isn't a good alternative to that. Using flight simulators, I think, is huge, and that can improve both the quality and the quantity of training. And then finally, that owners invest in appropriate maintenance for their aircraft. Sometimes they try to make things go a little bit longer. Again, it's economics, and it's a false economy.
Yeah, I think that's been proven time and again. When we try to save a buck or save time, that's an impediment to safety. It's we've seen the results on the insurance side. It's as what you indicate too. Do the right thing, train well, train frequently, do the right things on maintenance, and obviously that'll yield good results. But it is impressive to hear that of all the issues that making sure that this next generation is trained well, and that and aircraft operators and pilots are doing everything they can to get the best training and to have the right safety mindset. I mean, that just really stands out to me as from what you get to see in your position both now and through the years as being a big deal. Any thoughts on first steps that can be taken to address that issue? Or I know that's a can of worms, but just based on the discussion
no, that is easy to answer, Tim. Thank you for tossing that out. And so first off, I think the insurance industry could do a far better job of keeping better statistics. And I've addressed the Aviation Insurance Association a number of times. They keep making the mistake of inviting me back, because the message doesn't change, but some of the players do. But there's sort of this concept of what I'll refer to, and what they themselves refer to as tribal wisdom. We've kind of done things this way. It seemed to have worked reasonably well. We're going to continue to do that. Well, first off, I think you need to always say, how do you identify who's going to be a good risk? Because that's what your business is all about. And there's some very tangible proven benefits. And I started doing this a couple of years ago as an aircraft owner, as a hedge against significant price increases in my insurance because of the industry in general, and because I'm starting to become a little bit older, and industry conventional wisdom says, you may be starting to lose it. Don't ask my wife about that, but I think in an airplane, I'm still holding my own. But the best way that you can tell, at least in the short term, is the risk taking regular recurrent training? Are they flying on a regular basis? Well, if you have an electronic flight bag, you have a hard copy of their annual flight log. So don't just have me fill out the form on your insurance renewal. Ask for my flight log so you can see it. If not, make copies of your logbook. Secondly, what kind of courses are you taking? So I like to, at least once or twice a month, I will go online and take some refresher training or explore something new. And most of the platforms, the Air Safety Institute, the various type clubs, certainly the FAA Wings program, they all keep a transcript of your record. And so I send that in to my underwriter and say, look at all of the courses that I've been taking to keep my head in the game. Finally, and getting back to flight data monitoring, I have an engine monitor on my aircraft, and I download the data and send it off to be analyzed, and I get a report card. And I do that every couple of months. I send the report card in so that they can see that I am, in fact, paying close attention to what my engine is doing. Likewise, I do oil analysis, and that gets added to the package as well. So when you get this huge package of stuff, you start to see, okay, some people are taking it seriously, others are just kind of pencil whipping all of this. And I think that's worthy of some serious consideration on the part of the industry. So that's one of the areas that I think you could be doing something, and you could be doing it right now.
Sure. Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And, obviously anytime, a pilot can, share safety and training, that's a benefit, but we need to be better at universalizing, making it more universal and rethinking, like you said, how we evaluate those risks. And even with this telematics data and technology today, that could really shape how risks are written completely in the coming years with technology available today already.
So one other question. On my car, I have the choice of accepting a deductible for minor damage, however much I think I can reasonably afford. And yet that's not something that seems to be widely used, if at all, in light aircraft insurance. And in talking with my friends in the insurance business, they say, yeah, we're spending an awful lot of money on stupid pilot tricks where there's hangar rash or they ran over something or whatever. It's not a catastrophic failure. It seems to me that you could cut your losses significantly and the premiums could reflect that. If we would say, if you're willing to take on, I'll pick a number arbitrarily, $10,000 for minor damage that you've caused as a result of something, we're going to give you arbitrarily a 10% or 15% discount if the numbers work out across the board for the insurance companies. Why is that not something that's considered?
Yeah, that's a good question. We have seen a couple carriers in this recent market, and just say this is what we're going to do to help keep our pricing low, but it's not universal. It's just kind of like you say. There's a conventional wisdom that there's hardly ever an aviation loss that doesn't cost X amount, so we just don't do it. But I don't think there's a good answer today. That I think it's one of those things, as you allude to. There's a discussion that should be had as to how can we do things better to because obviously when money's on the line for the operator, insurance is great, but if it's for the catastrophic loss that you don't want to be a part of anyway, we're going to be a whole lot more careful with our operations the entire time. We got skin in the game, I think, is the
exactly
saying. So
exactly.
I think it's a good discussion, a good point, and that's why we want to bring up conversations like this that'll be shared and discussed in the industry. Obviously there's other factors that insurers deal with, like their reinsurance contracts and things like that, but those don't change without these discussions. And so go ahead.
Right. No, I understand it, but I think it is something that insurance, aviation as a whole tends to be pretty conservative about embracing change, and aviation insurance is more conservative perhaps in the industry at large. And so things move very, very slowly. But I think some of the changes that we're talking about here, and particularly in the flight data monitoring, telematics, as you refer to it, will have a salutary benefit in terms of improving the safety. Some people are not going to like it at all because they don't want people looking over their shoulder. In my case, I figure anybody wants to look at what I'm doing, I'm perfectly fine with that. And if they're going to give me an incentive to do it, boy, I'll do it that much quicker.
Yeah, and just for your knowledge, so you and I visited last year at the Aviation Insurance Association, where we had asked you to speak, and it was a good conversation. And you and I talked. You attended some of the education sessions that we put on, and so one of the ones we did this year was on technology in our industry. And you're right, our technology can be behind the power curve of insurance, of aviation, and also of integrating these new technologies. But the good news is, for your knowledge, is we've established a committee in that organization just to work to bring that to bring us into today, so that we can be positioned to go into the future. So these will be looked at and discussed more as an industry from a safety and overall industry benefit perspective.
So you asked about some other things, and what I'm about to say here represents my view, not the National Transportation Safety Board, all right? So we got that on the record.
Yeah.
But FAA itself has some very archaic rules which were established decades or even half a century ago, and they haven't changed. So, for example, they're saying that on a certificated airplane, everything pretty much has to come with a parts manufacturing authority or from the original manufacturer and so on. And in many cases, because we're dealing with low volume and also because they have high costs and there may be some other reasons, we have parts that are badly overpriced. Let me give you an example. My airplane is equipped with static wicks, which is nothing more than a small piece of wire with a swage attached to it. Let's arbitrarily say that to produce this would cost a couple of dollars. Let's say that you mark it up significantly so that it's arbitrarily $10. Huge price markup. That's not what they sell for. Today, a static wick, when I need to replace them, they're almost $50. Air conditioning compressors, identical to automotive compressors. However, they have to be certified by the FAA. Well, the question is why? In my airplane, the air conditioning is driven by a belt. If the compressor seizes up, the belt will likely break. It will get my attention, but the airplane is going to be just fine. Why having a 3 to 4 times the price of an air conditioning compressor, which is identical as a part number? And FAA chooses not to address these kinds of things. Changing out light bulbs. A lot of people would like to change out to LEDs because they're brighter, they use less electricity, etc. Once again, it has to be FAA approved. And my sense is that there are enough other things that the FAA could and should be doing, and there are some areas where it's essential. For example, the turbocharging muffler clamps, airworthiness directive just came out on that, and NTSB has been looking at that for a number of decades where the clamps themselves were failing. Those should be time-limited components. It took a long time to get that changed, and there are certain parts of the airplane that absolutely have to be certified. But an awful lot of the airplane most certainly does not, to the level that it's used as an excuse to drive up the prices.
Yeah, and no doubt, anything aviation is more expensive already, and obviously inflation has taken impact, which has had a big impact on the aviation insurance industry, and obviously we've seen, from an insurance perspective, challenges from the FAA certification process on aircraft entirely. So it'd be great to see an initiative to improve that, to not only make it more efficient but effective at the same time. And that's what happens a lot of times in an industry where catastrophic loss is a potential. We go slow and don't make major moves, and for the fear of what could happen, I suppose.
Well, I think the areas I'm talking about are not, if a particular part would fail, it would not be a catastrophic loss.
Right.
And that's the point. The thing is that some of these items do need to be replaced on a time limited basis or whatever it happens to be. And economics drives all of this. And so the owner is reluctant to replace it, runs it to failure. That creates more damage or possibly a fatal crash. Well, then, we're into really big money. Let's take the emotion out of it. But any crash is bad for business, and we need to start looking at this in I think, a much more organized and data-driven fashion. And that's a term that's overused, but in too many cases, we don't really follow it. And FAA, in many cases, doesn't have any data to support what they say that they must do on every part of a certificated aircraft.
Well, and that data, that's an important point. And the conversation, and you mentioned and alluded to this earlier, is there is not a repository, at least in general aviation in the United States, of aviation losses. I think, there is a requirement on hail, building hail claims and things like that insurers report to verify that type of data. But that is an initiative that has been brought up in the industry. I think there's a lack of a trusted third party to aggregate it. People protect it as their their business model, the revenue model, and are cautious with it. But the data is pretty transparent on the airline side, and that's why a lot of these safety initiatives, obviously there's more money involved, but they're implemented on the airline side first because that information is readily available, and these technologies are readily implemented. So that is an initiative, I think, that needs to and will be discussed in the near future in the aviation insurance industry, is where and how can we provide our loss statistics in order to improve safety and our loss records.
One other thing that I think that the airline industry has done pretty well with is when people are turning over all of their information, the flight crews and the maintenance teams and so on, and they voluntarily divulge, hey, made a mistake, et cetera. In most cases, it didn't result in a mishap, but they say, hey, raise your hand, I screwed up. The concept of the term, I don't quite know where it came from, but the term is just culture. And that is that you don't punish people for turning self-reporting. You reward them by saying, hey, thank you. Let's go ahead and get this information out and don't do it again. Don't make a habit of it. But let's learn from all of that, and let's start to get smarter. If we start to see, for example, maybe the airlines had something called ASAP, Aviation Safety Action Plan, or something like that. I forget the exact acronym.
Yep.
But they started collecting data where flight crews would have a problem either with a particular aircraft procedure or, for example, a standard instrument departure, and the crews were continually busting it. And they said, wait a minute, there's something wrong with the procedure. It's not that the crews are doing a terrible job, but we're having too many exceedances. Let's change the procedure. That's smart. And they did punish the crews for doing it. And I think we should be looking at the same attitude of, we're not going to slap you, certainly not for the first time, if you self-report that you made a mistake.
Oh, that's good. Well, I want to be respectful of your time today. We've talked about a number of things: insurance, safety, the technology piece. Is there anything else related to, either the aviation insurance part of the industry or the aviation safety aspect that we didn't really get a chance to cover you think would be good to highlight before we end our discussion today?
I think we've pretty well covered it, both from the NTSB's perspective, a bit from my personal perspective. But, one minor thought, certainly when you're flying, any airplane, is everybody needs to have a plan B, because unlike the Blues Brothers, you're not on a mission from God. You need to figure out, if the weather's not agreeing or some piece of equipment isn't performing, I need to figure out how to do something else, as opposed to being locked into, hey, we can make this work. That's not a good mindset.
Yeah, that word mindset is something that I think can be an overarching theme of what we've discussed here today. The safety it's a mindset, and it's important to the pilots, mechanics. It's important to the aviation insurance industry. Everyone involved in the industry, and I think going in with that mindset, it can only yield positive results. If you don't have that mindset, you might have a negative result you don't want. And so anyway, I think that's just a good takeaway. I personally that's on my own personal opinion. It's always a pleasure, Bruce, to visit with you. You have such unique perspective, great, experience and wisdom. There's several good nuggets here. And I think there's just some things that, the aviation and the aviation insurance industry need to review, need to think about how we can do better and improve. And I know that we want to as an industry. And so I just thank you for your time, your expertise today. And thank you for serving our industry so well for so many years.
Well, Tim, thank you very much for the opportunity. I've been blessed to be able to fly with some of the best people and the best companies going and get to talk about my favorite topic. So again, thank you for the opportunity, and safe flights to everybody.
Thank you, Bruce. Well, that's all for this episode. Join us again next time as we continue navigating the waypoints in aviation insurance. Until then, enjoy clear skies and unlimited visibility.
Thanks for listening to the Aviation Insurance Podcast. If you found this episode of value, please share it with someone who would benefit from this information. Don't forget to subscribe in your podcast player so you don't miss any new episodes, and to help our show have more impact. This episode is brought to you by Aeris Insurance Solutions, your flight plan for navigating the turbulence of aviation insurance. For more information, visit aerisinsurance.com. That is www.aerisinsurance.com. Disclaimer: These episodes are for educational purposes only, and due to the changing regulatory and legal nature of the business, some information may change over time. Having a well-educated and experienced aviation insurance broker on your team is an absolute requirement to success in business and for managing your aircraft and aviation business risks.